All right, welcome everyone to the second day of our conference on emerging platform society. We want to extend a particularly warm welcome both on behalf of IIT Kanpur, where I'm located, and the University of Bologna, where Pier Giorgio is located. We'll start off with a keynote address by Professor Sophie Mützel. Professor Mützel is based out of the University of Lucerne, and she has a particular focus on media networks. I think a really interesting aspect of her work is also her contribution to relational sociology. Some of the areas on which she has been working on include economic sociology, sociology of culture, computational text analytic methods, the sociology of the digital, social network analysis, and also sociological theory. Professor Mützel has recently published some very interesting articles in journals such as New Media and Society and Big Data and Society. She's also authored 2 books published by the University of Michigan Press and FAB Verlag. I think today her talk, from what I understand, is based on one of her more recent projects on digital payments. But prior to that, she has also led projects on big data. Professor Mützel was trained in sociology at Columbia, Cornell, and she also holds a degree in political science, an undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley. She has been quite prolific, which you can see in terms of the fellowships and positions she has held at the Center for European Studies at Harvard. She has been previously a Jean Monnet Fellow at the European University Institute, Florence, and has also held a visiting position at the University of Vienna. Prior to her position at the University of Lucerne, she has also held positions at Social Science Research Center, Berlin, and at Humboldt University, Berlin. Currently, Professor Mützel at Lucerne also leads the MA program in Media and Networks at the Department of Sociology. She's also been instrumental in setting up the MA in Computational Social Sciences, and also functions as the Vice Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So we are very honored to have you here, Professor Mützel, and we're looking forward to your talk. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. The honor is all mine to be speaking here today and to be meeting with you, at least in this digital forum. I say hello to around the world. I also say hello to my team who's joined this conference. Hello, Tatiana, Marcus, and Antonia, who are working with me on this new project on digital payments, on which I will be speaking to you today. So let me start sharing my screen. Can you see a woman in a shop? Yes, great. Thank you so much. So now my talk is about digital payments, and indeed it really is about the seemingly very small act of pressing a button on our phone, on looking at our phone, or just waving it in order to shed some light into the workings of the digital economy. I would say that we are currently witnessing an unprecedented increase of new financial services. When paying at stores, we can now not only choose between cash, credit, or debit cards to pay, but we can also pay using our apps on our smartphones. Apps for digital payment promise us users to ease and enhance our lives. They record our spendings, they offer us discounts, they help to reduce the time we spend at a store's checkout. And at the same time, during the global pandemic that we're still in, are touted as the hygienic way to pay. No cash, no card to use in order to pay. In turn, apps, the global tech giants, banks, fintech intermediaries, and retail companies, which enable such digital payments, track, produce, parse, categorize, and reassemble those user-produced digital data points for security, as well, of course, for profit-making purposes. Now, one of the core ideas of this talk is that payments apps are central devices in the digital economy. They provide for further streams of user-generated transactional data, which is the economic asset, including purchasing preferences, amount spent, location, and time. Moreover, these payments apps also produce transactional data, as I will argue, that can be linked to other streams of trace data from that shopper's smartphones. So they can collect and assemble streams of digital behavioral trace and transactional data. For the banking industry, this value in payments no longer rests in transaction fee, but rather in the transactional data that payments yield. And for the retail companies, think brick and mortar supermarkets, such transactional data promises insights into expression of exact behavioral and consumer decisions. And once parsed, analyzed, and packages, companies sell access to these data packages as profiles for targeted marketing, a most profitable part of the digital economy. In turn, device users received personalized advertisements, personalized recommendations, particular rebates, and become formatted for further consumption. Moreover, when paying digitally, the production of such transactional data brings into focus relations between payment app users, retailers, banks, fintech intermediaries, and marketing agencies. Some payment apps, as I will show, have started to imitate social network sites when they enable communication between users. So in some way, we can say that these types of digital payment platforms are becoming a form of social media. Moreover, because these payment apps link different types of data together, they may serve as a so far missing unique prism for companies to observe whole chains of transactions between users, customers, banking industry, retailers, and banks. So at shops, and this is the research side that we are looking at shops, digital payments may intertwine offline data on purchases and offline data on digital identities with online transactional data. Now, in this talk argues that in digital payments, two fundamental mechanisms of the what others have called the give to get digital economy concomitantly interconnect. We have processes of personalization and relational embedding. Personalization is based on the embedding of disassembled data points, that is segments of data points about users, which get reassembled into profiles to produce a personal experience. Moreover, such algorithmic, usually it's algorithmically driven, personalization leads to changes in relations, as it engineers not only customers, but also entangles and formats relations between customers and retailers. Therefore, it also creates new relations between real customers, inferred customers, and estimated interests and others. Now, just to be clear what I mean by digital payments refer to transaction conducted using a smartphone or other personal small electronic devices at a point of sale. For example, at a kiosk terminal, via an app or a wallet, using near-field communication, some sort of QR code, or some Bluetooth-based transmission, which allows contactless payment. These user-enabled apps or wallets are connected typically to banking instruments such as debit cards, credit cards, or online value accounts, and allow for immediate payment without logging onto an online account. Now, I didn't ask for a show of hands who has these types of digital payments installed on their phone, but perhaps we can talk about that later in the Q&A. I'd be curious to hear about your experiences. Now, the use of such payments possibilities differs vastly around the globe, which this group will also be interesting to query. According to cultural, regulatory, and institutional and demographic contexts. So in some regions and countries, actually, we have very high numbers of non-cash digital payment transactions per inhabitant. Australia, Norway, Sweden, and also South Korea and China. Almost all global tech giants offer unique digital payment options for everyday retail transactions, while also regional apps exist. Kind of struggling with technology here a little bit. Excuse me. So market research, just to give you some sort of some indicative number, expect a 4-fold increase of the global digital payment transaction value over the next couple of years. This is a slide based on numbers of 2019, and you see the arrows going up for the expected growth of the transaction value. Current research continues these positive estimates and the growth curve, and expect over 5,000 billion US dollars in transaction value for the year 2026. Now, using the technological and social infrastructure of social networking platforms, interestingly enough, digital payments are particularly ubiquitous in China, where people use Alipay by Alibaba or WeChat Pay by Tencent to pay using their smartphones. Another way to use these, or to institutionalize and to build these types of payments into a pre-existing infrastructure, is the example of Swish, which is a Swedish product, a Swedish app backed by the main Swedish banks, that is used for all kinds of purchases, including at shops, flea market vendors, parking meters, church services. And indeed, Sweden has one of the highest uses of not only card payments worldwide, but also one of the highest uses of these digital payments using the smartphone app. In this case, the app is linked to the Swedish bank account and requires a Swedish national ID number. And basically, I mean, almost 100% of the Swedish adult population uses this app, Swish, which is a very regional app for only Sweden. And we can already see across Europe, adoptions rates vary widely. And German-speaking countries are particularly hesitant. And among them, Switzerland, which is where I'm currently located and where this project is funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. Switzerland poses a particularly interesting case because it is known for its banking services, world-renowned, and for low levels of risks and high levels of privacy. Yet at the same time, the Swiss banks and the Swiss financial industry is really pushing also for these types of digital payment services. Right now, the rates of adoption are relatively low. Of course, we've seen with the pandemic a new rise in the usage of digital payment and of contactless payment, to be more of contactless payment than of digital payment, but also of digital payments. The Swiss have their own, as you can see here, own regional digital payment app. It's called Twint. Which is backed by Swiss banks and has had a long time of trying to limit the use of payment apps by global tech giants such as Apple Pay or Google Pay. Now, yes, and we see the accelerator of the pandemic to the adoption of contactless payment. Now, on payments in general, of course, Research in sociology and anthropology has long shown that economic transactions are also social transactions embedded within a particular context and creating social relations. Money as such is a socially contingent phenomenon, as sociologists have shown. It is incorporated into webs of personal and professional relations, where it gets earmarked as belonging to different categories. For example, this part of the salary is to be spent on groceries. This gift from grandma is to be saved for my next vacation. Thus, the meaning of money is tightly connected to social relations. Studies on credit and debit cards and their everyday use similarly emphasize the embedded social nature of money. In contrast to cash, the so-called plastic money is personalized, has our name on, we can trace it. And with its materiality, it can signal belonging to particular status groups or to support particular causes. Such perspectives present alternatives to the rational, atomized market exchange of money, goods, and services of economic and sociological classics. Now, money as a currency for economic exchange has received much sociological scholarly attention, including old and new alternative currencies. And of course, we have a new round and a new wave of these studies on crypto, Bitcoin, all sorts of digital monies that are currently being created as we speak. The act of payment, I would argue, exists independently, however, of the type of currency. Payments are one element of an economic exchange and refer to the form of transaction. Now, an exchange requires a calculation of value, for example, on the basis of price, between exchanging partners. In a payment, economic value is transferred after such calculation has already taken place. Moreover, payments also create a particular excess because of the work involved in settling exchange. We need intermediaries of the interaction, charge fees for payments of the services and infrastructures they provide. And between interacting actors, payments create and define social relations. Now, for payments to take place, technologies or transfer are needed, including a diversity of things, from paper tokens, coins, to now more checks and plastic card and electronic impulses. Digital payments now also require particular devices for checkout transaction, though no longer physical wallets, but rather card networks, point of sale devices, wire service, application developer, etc., which change the act of payment itself. Having previously enabled and consented to a payment option on our smartphone by connecting our banking or credit card information with a payment app or our phone number, we now only need to touch a button, look into the camera, or wave the phone to pay for our purchases. None of those technologies, for example, facial recognition, were intended for payment. But they involve the adaptation. So payment involves the adaptation of existing technological infrastructure. And at the same time, digital payment apps build on existing financial infrastructures, for example, credit card companies or bank account. Research in the sociology of finance, economic sociology, and science and technology studies have shown that these things of payments are more than mere technologies. They are devices that shape the economy. They help to digitalize and to potentially increase consumption. So as consumption devices, payment apps enable a reconfiguration of consumer practices by contactless tap-and-go payment, which is based on the one-time provided information and consent. Payment becomes instantaneous, seamless, and moves completely to the background. It becomes ambient. The so-called payment experience of social and communicative interaction with a seller, the product, the peers, and potential future buyers instead moves to center stage. Such ambient payment may take place in an app, for example, Apple Pay, or are as part of a platform like in WeChat Pay. And as contributions of the expanding field of social media platform studies have shown, the interrelations of users and platform architecture, the technical affordances of algorithms, and the business imperative of data and extraction are key for understanding the current state of capitalism. And social media platforms and their software architecture create seamless interfaces that produce the social as economic capital. So I'd say these payment devices are part of this larger platform economy that we are currently developing. Some platform apps, some payment apps have started to imitate social network platforms when they enable communication between users. For example, when with their payment, users can send text and emojis as a greeting to a friend who picked up the bill. So it's no longer about the payment, but rather it's an emphasis is on the social relationship. And indeed, because of the platform-based communication in sometimes even public feeds and their incentives to engage in social interactions, payment apps have been identified by, for example, Lena Swartz, or by Lena Swartz, as becoming social media. And vice versa, we also see that social media giants are striving to platformize financial interactions by embedding payment within their platform. In the European Union, such a transformation is in part encouraged by recent regulatory directives towards open banking. We here see an image of Facebook, which allows to or encourages to pay via the Facebook, or Meta, I should say by now, via Facebook and Instagram platforms. Such platformization of financial transaction, of course, would be another type of data point, and it would allow tech giants to gather transactional and trace data even further about their users, and it would effectively yield further treasure troves for data analysis, tracking, parsing, categorization, and reassembling those user-produced digital data points for profit making. And to be sure, in some countries, these types of financial transaction with via the platforms currently exists and are spreading in their use. Now, so far I haven't really talked about retail, and I would like to shift now, because we can imagine the collection of data points very well in online shopping, but now in a retail situation, knowing your customer is much more difficult. Small retailers may know their customer preferences because of their personal relationship. They may remember what they previously bought or what their favorite brands are and how much money they spend. And so they may be able to directly market new products coming in, or they may hand out discounts and coupons for their customers. And then it's interesting to look at the historic developments, because we see that, and interesting studies have shown that we see that monetary transactions and products purchased have indeed long been recorded and linked to individual customers and analyzed for targeted promotions. This is the history of department stores, the record keeping in department stores shows in the US in the 1920s. And here customers were approached and personally could receive rebates on the information based of their prior preferences. Now, this type of personal retailer-customer relationship does not easily hold for supermarkets, whose self-service was intended to increase efficiency while also democratizing and by that depersonalizing shopping. And research shows that before 1990, supermarket managers, and I thought that was an interesting fact, used their gut feelings when ordering products. They didn't know what their customers wanted. Of course, there's market research, which regularly surveyed supermarket customers on their preferences. But really, supermarkets had little systematic sense on who their customers were, what they wanted, and if indeed there were returning regulars. Now, the next development comes with what marketing agencies called a stealth weapon in marketing, and that is the loyalty and reward programs. Again, these types of programs have also existed for a long time, with little coupons and little stickers and like stamps being collected. But in the 1990s, these types of reward programs were now individualized per customers. And this is when supermarkets began to mail out specific promotions to members of these reward programs, matching what they had previously bought with participating marketer coupons, targeting particular segments. For example, those who had previously bought kosher products received coupons for additional kosher products. And also interestingly, in the 1990s, when these loyalty and reward programs really started to take hold again, supermarkets were overwhelmed with data. They didn't know what to do with the data about the customers' choices and preferences that they collected through these reward programs. Now, in the early 2000s, customers were using these loyalty cards and received coupons when they swiped their loyalty cards. And I'm sure probably all of us have one of those loyalty cards in our wallets, swipe these loyalty cards at the supermarket cash registers. Yet they were kind of too difficult to work with. People forgot their cards, they used someone else's card, and overall the industry found that their collected loyalty program data was they weren't really reliable. And at that time, if you remember, early 2000s, in a different universe, in a way, the tech platforms and the online marketing industry began to work on that marketing's holy grail, that is to know, or rather to calculate, a user's tastes, preferences, habits, and desires ex ante. As we know by now very well, Google achieved this quest. Google business models, what Shoshana Zuboff calls the behavioral value reinvestment cycle, builds on this formerly called data exhaust, exhausts all the data that users produced when we type a search and click on a search result. These types of data points are used to sell predictions about users' behavior. And then machine learning algorithms process these unstructured behavioral surplus data into prediction products designed to forecast what a user will think, feel, and do now, soon, or later in repeated feedback loop ad infinitum. So in the online world, Google and the other tech giants, we can talk about Amazon, we can talk about Facebook and all the others, have really succeeded in anticipating and calculating ex ante what we as users want and would desire. And they have shown how personalized experiences, targeted marketing, tailored apps, and building relationships with customers are achievable and highly profitable. Now, the question is, how does this translate into brick and mortar stores for supermarket retailers where shopping occurs in persons? And this is really the questions. How can the marketing agencies and retailer know their customer tastes and preferences? And And with the rise of the mobile phone, a new situation arose. With the new smartphones, our little computers that we carry with us at all times, or most of us, shoppers themselves bring in a technology into the shops that could be used to reliably identify each shopper. And so this seemingly small mobile phone, kind of lowly mobile phone, was turned into a marketing, loyalty, and potentially payment device. And indeed, just as other apps, payment apps track users and log their purchasing preferences, the amount spent, and the location. And now what is interesting is that previously when we looked at these in-store purchasing histories, even in the old days of record keeping, it was typically only a fragment that a bank customer, a bank or credit card company could see, because we only saw elements of what was on our bill. We knew what we purchased, but perhaps the credit card didn't exactly know which items we purchased. So it was really only a fragment, a particular fragment of the entire chain of the transaction data. And now with payment apps and digital payments, this limited and fragmented view changes. Current practices in data payments build on the history of consumer surveillance, and they also collect, they keep records, they identify customers, and they collect data for data mining for targeted marketing in-house or by third parties. Yet in addition to the transactional data produced with each payment transaction in the app, these data then can be linked to other streams of behavioral trace data from that shopper's smartphone. Payment apps may thus collect and assemble streams of digital behavioral trace and transactional data from payments. So rather than just a particular fragment of transactional activities, streams of data from payments can present entire network chains of transaction. So in effect, payment apps produce transactional data that are qualitatively and quantitatively different than the data based on consumption and observation from before. It's really the bringing in together different streams of data that these payment apps can be used for, and that's why they're such an important device, I would argue, in this digital economy. Qualitatively, these new types of transactional data offer granular and richer insights into preferences of users. Here, this is the Swiss, one of the Swiss retailers app, loyalty app, combined with a banking information. Payment apps aim at developing lasting relationships between customers and merchants for either further consumption. Within one device, consumers potentially bring together information on their shopping preferences and their retailer's loyalty card and their purchasing history to then deliver targeted advertising and product rebates. And the goal, of course, from the view of the retailers is to make the surveillance and selling scenario as smooth and as tension-free for the shoppers as possible. Moreover, data collection may also include all kinds of purchases across major merchants of potentially global reach, but also all kinds of other computer-mediated interactions, that is, searches and clicks and likes and comments used or produced on the phones. That is, that behavioral surplus that Zuboff talks about. On the phone that is really running the digital economy. Quantitatively, there are also much more data points than ever before, because these smartphone devices constantly produce behavioral trace, transactional, and metadata about individual events. And with debit or credit cards, banks, if we look at banks from the perspective of banks only had access to sender's account transaction. That is where, when, and how much was paid. Payment apps now provide a network of transactional metadata about consumption preferences that is linking amounts, products, time of purchases with different sellers and their banks across time. And then income non-bank regulated payment services, such as Google Pay, they can also generate data detailing the networks of connections between senders and recipients and link those connections back to data points from their data ecology. And for banks, intermediaries, and merchants with payment apps, the discrepancy between observable fragments of consumer choices and the so far unobservable consumer behaviors and choices collapses into an entire stream of data. It is really, in a way, revolutionary to bring these different data points together at the point where a consumption takes place, where something is bought and not only looked at. Now, like I said early in the beginning, it's not only about transactional data, it's also about changes in relations and the creation of new relations. One type of relation is the observable social relation between users of an app who then publicly share a communication about a payment transaction. We saw that earlier, where I can send an emoji to someone who's paid for my latest coffee. But I can also, I also have transactional data streams that allow creating new networks of relations between customers and retail companies, with intermediaries such as fintech startups and non-regulated payment services, networking platforms, marketing agencies, and their data management platforms. For the general case of platform companies, and this is what I show in my slide here, a graph from Fourcade and Klatz 2020, they show that how such new relationships are engineered in digital capitalism according to a generalized reciprocity. So by giving away so-called digital gifts of using their platforms for free, platform companies enroll us users in an obligation to reciprocate. We need to share our information in order to get a service. And in such reciprocal give-to-get relationships, user status are the gifts that get passed on to other companies. These large amounts of individually, transactionally produced digital data points, typically particular packaged parts thereof, segments thereof, that are then transformed in economic capital. So I would say that these types, and we can say that these types of data circulate between different economic actors. They can be turned into predictions for micro-marketing, but also for credit scoring, for prices, for insurance premiums, as lots of research has already shown in the last couple of years. And at this very core, and I would say that this generalized reciprocity is at the core in the shift towards a targeted so-called personalized economy. The possibilities that we see, the offers that we receive, how much we pay, all of that is structured according to our digital profile that is based on our digitally measured individually, but also relationally embedded choices. And these segments of our data points get dissected, further dissected, and then again reassembled to produce an anticipated customer who would want to receive a next rebate or shop for a next product. And in the long run, new, rather opaque markets for optimizations for persons as customers and as citizens may be developing, in which digital payments play an integral part, I would argue. Our consumption choices at a retailer today may indeed impact our future life chances in the future because of the data points that get selected, the calculations and anticipations and expectations that are produced. Now, I argue that we need to take a look at the payment industry and at the details of the circle of actors, from users to retailers, banks, fintechs, and intermediaries. In case of digital payment, a user pays seamlessly with an app. Data from this user may get passed along to other apps, retailers, banks, payment intermediaries, and marketing or advertisers. Indeed, as part of the bargain of this give-to-get relationship users strike with companies in the digital economy, we are obliged to share our information to receive services. And failure to reciprocate sharing information may result in being cut off from services and from companies from the access of large amounts of transaction. Now, looking at this generalized reciprocity also helps to explore two fundamental processes in digital economy and what is characteristic for the platform economy that is emerging. That is processes of personalization and of relational embedding at the same time on the basis of transactional data. When tracing transactional data, personalization efforts are based upon, we will find algorithmic processes that calculate relations of similarity and differences between user segments and user segment clusters and yield predictions of future decisions, instead of individually tailored recommendations. Thus, personalized ads are presented as a perfect match just from me, rest on calculated generalizations about who I am, that is, which part of my behavioral trace and transaction data available I am similar or different to others, who are also estimated, also calculated upon on their data profile. And the idea of personalized offers must really be seen as an engineered means to continue user engagement, to keep the data flowing, and to continue the uneven, though generalized exchange between users and economic actors in the digital economy. And then the notion of relational embedding captures the inherent relationality between users, their data points, and other economic actors. On the one hand, relational embedding is a process dual to personalization. With users' data points typically in partial and packaged data profiles, their predictive preferences are relationally estimated, compared, and contrasted to other data profiles. Transactional data thus turns into algorithmically calculated predictions on users' future relationships with companies, as loyal or as creditworthy. On the other hand, relational embedding refers to the multitude of relations the circulation of transactional data entails. In following the stream of transactional data from users to other economic actors, patterns of relational embedding will become evident. And this is really where our current empirical investigation starts. We are looking at two different countries. We're looking at the case of Switzerland and of Sweden, two different countries within Europe who have very different institutional setups and very different notions of how to go about, how to work in the digital economy. And we look at the world of fintech, and we look at how customers and retailers interact in and how they produce these chains of transactional data, how they go about personalization, and how this relational embedding then gets produced. And this will be a qualitative and kind of a macroscopic inquiry into the current practices and some of the visions that these digital payment apps, the users, but also fintech industry has on this type of bringing together the different data points in payment apps and all the apps that are a part of that payment app space, the financial management apps, the pay now, buy now, pay later apps. All these are part of this payment app universe that we are on the verge of getting into in our field work. So with this, I would like to end my talk. And thank you very much. And am now curious about your comments of my conceptual and my presentation of my conceptual layout and my larger take on the digital payment in the digital economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mützel. I thought we could not have started with a more appropriate talk, because you've really tied in, well, how central the question of payments become when we start to think about an emerging platform society, but also highlighted the multiplicity of aspects that we could consider. I'd also like to thank you for historicizing some of these conversations, because very often we think of, at this moment, this seems so important, but really, whether it's consumer data and how long it's been tracked, that was a very, very important reminder. So I think maybe I'll be selfish and ask my question. I thought this was very thought-provoking, while others are also trying to articulate their, I'm sure, comments and questions. I liked how you had picked up on the category of fintech, because, for instance, in India, this has been a very, very vocal category. So right at the beginning, you mentioned how there was this association of cash with lack of hygiene. And in India, we saw in the public discourse, for instance, fintech company owners would come up as almost public health experts and say, yes, I think we should stay away from cash and really switch to digital payments. So I'd be eager to know more about what you think, the contribution of fintech companies is. And secondly, can you really think of, is this really as homogeneous a category as we're thinking, or are there variations that we can consider?
Thank you. That's a very, very good question, very good point. And indeed, if I had all the money and all the time of the world, or even just a little bit more time and a little bit more money, I think India would be we should really also look at India. Now, I'm looking at these two European cases because this is where my money, my funding agency is. And it's, I think, already an interesting comparison. But of course, what's going on in India, what's going on in China and elsewhere in the world is super interesting and super valuable, would be super valuable for us to understand. Now in India, now I'm not an expert on India, but if I'm not mistaken, there really was the move to go cashless, right? There was the demonetization, as it's called in the literature, that is cash bills were pulled out of the system, and really the trend to digitize. And perhaps Pierre can speak later to the case of Italy, where this has also just been recently discussed also in terms of the COVID pandemic. Yet the Italians, I think, are not willing to let go of the cash as of yet. So in India, we see that there's this government push to get rid of cash. And of course, then the fintech world, and like you said, I think we should be much more research needs to be done on what encapsulates fintech, right? This is just a catch-all phrase, and I'm not even sure we have a good take on it yet, what this actually entails. I think there are companies who are working on payment directly, but then there's also companies who are working on services that are attached to payment. Like I said, there's these financial management services who then have access to, you grant access to your account, and then they provide you with information on your spending and on your budgeting, and they help to do that. And then you have these host of companies who provide you with micro credits, consumer credits. And of course, that would be, I would say, another project that could easily be hooked onto our project. And that is what happens to consumer spending if payment becomes so easy, and you just sort of look in your phone and you can just, spending increases. And we see some of that already in the Chinese case, that the amount of consumer credit has gone up in China, and I would also assume in India, because spending is so easy. Like I said, I think it's a super interesting case, India, and I think I would love to see more research on that. And I think the fintech companies are also need to be differentiated, and we also need more research on who works with whom. Is this part of? Do they get bought up by the giant tech companies? Do they offer alternatives to the global tech companies? Do they say, we're really all about health? So there's different framings, and that's super interesting to be studied.
Thank you. So there are a couple of questions that we can take. I'll start with in order they came in. So start with Pierre and then on to Tom.
Okay, thank you very much, Gillette. Thank you very much, Sophie, for your thought-provoking presentation. And I have a two-sided question. Before you quoted Italy, and even if it is not my field of research, newspaper and news in general are talking about the fact that Italy looks like to be the country with the lower rate of adoption of any form of digital payment, which is plastic or whatever. And compared with that, we also have the highest rate of tax fraud. So mostly it's digital money are perceived as a form of control, and also not allowed what is generally called and defined as a gray economy, which is grounding a lot of the so-called informal economy in Italy. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I'm more interested in the aspect about the fact that money exchange may be considered as a form of technology. And when you made your presentation about the supermarket and the Fidelity card as an example, my mind jumped on the idea of Amazon Go store, in which, the tracking of the consumer or the segmentation of the consumer comes not from the payment system, but from the RFID label, and the fact that basically each and every product is literally tracked more than now with the classical system of Fidelity card and monitoring the consumer activity. But said that, the idea is, may we say or hypothesize that payment and system of money exchange will compete with different technologies in the near future in the consumer domain? That's basically the idea. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So just to get on the Italian case, I think that is interesting. And indeed, in Switzerland, we even see regional differences between the French, the German, and the Italian part of Switzerland. And we also see in the Italian part of Switzerland greater hesitancy to use digital cashless payment. And I think we shall see how that develops. I think we did see an uptake on cashless ways to pay during the pandemic, also in Italy. Now, the question about the trackable products and Amazon Go and what does that mean for monetary exchange? I think that's where we're really heading. It's already the case that each product is trackable, right, in a supermarket, and we will see. I would argue I would assume and argue in the near future, more of these types of systems develop to incite us as customers to really forego the payment, the sort of the moment that we're standing in front of some screen and handing over some money. It's really not even necessary anymore when each product already has a barcode, is trackable. We may, just need to log in that's what Amazon Go does, log in when we enter the shop and then leave the store with our products where lots of cameras are looking at us and checking what products we've seen. So the money exchange really only occurs far, far, far in the background. And that's sort of that's the vision also of the industry, to make this payment seamless and to really make it about something else. So Amazon Go would ask you, or the Amazon Go app would ask you after you leave your shop with your products in your bag, how was your shopping experience? And you would then produce some sort of smileys or hearts, or I don't know, some kind of celebratory rockets on your phone, and share this with others. So it's really about the consumption experience rather about the monetary exchange anymore. It all becomes this big festivity, this consumer festivity. So, and I think that's really a worthwhile practice to be looking at in the next future. Near future.
Pierre, if you're done, we can move on to Tom's question.
Thank you, Gillette, and thanks, Sophie, for a wonderful and theoretically really, really rich presentation. So, as an anthropologist, my ears standed on end when you mentioned generalized reciprocity, and the idea of data as being a gift. And I thought that's a really exciting thing. And you have this wonderful diagram of the APIs and the data moving kind of between users, developers, retailers, and things like this. So, I think one thing that was important about when Marshall Sahlins in Stone Age Economics, when he puts forward the idea of generalized reciprocity, is it's like an altruistic thing, amongst kind of egalitarian societies. So I wonder how this fits into the schema of this kind of data moving around, and maybe if you could explain a little bit more about why it's generalized in that nature rather than, say, negative reciprocity, which was another of his kind of models, if you like.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So I should be clear, this is a model that I've used from Marion Foucault and Daniel Klutz. So this is not my work, I'm just using it, and I'm trying to, or we as a team, I should say, are trying to expand on that model. And so what I like about it is really this idea of give to get. So we already, in order to use the services that Google offers or that any of these platforms offers, we need to give something, and we cannot not give something. Otherwise, we can't use their services. And then the reciprocity, of course, is the really how this, the generalized reciprocity is how this moves around, from the data moves around from each of these economic actors, gets transformed, and then basically comes back to us when we get the next round of better services. But I think it would be worthwhile, now they don't, it would be worthwhile to look at Sahlins' work again, and to also think about this negative reciprocity. I think that's a valuable comment. The problem, or my problem, and as you can tell, I think this is not very clear yet in my head, is really from which there's so many different actors who have so many different interests, and I keep switching my position in a way. I'm not sure if I want to, I enter the field, I think about it as a consumer, but then there's also the banks, there are the companies, there are the fintechs, there are the retailers. So I think it's really a multifaceted phenomenon. And I don't want to avoid looking at all of these actors. But I think the reciprocity issue brings to the forefront that I have to probably make some choices as whom do I look at? And isn't it a negative reciprocity for the consumers? Whereas for the companies, I think it's not a negative reciprocity. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. We have a question from one of the PhD students at IIT Kanpur, Kalpesh. You can go ahead with your question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Professor Mützel. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I'm broadly exploring the areas of financial socialization, where I'm trying to see how people are learning to use different financial apps. And from there, this question is coming. Like, for instance, in the context of digitalization, you have discussed about digital payments app and its adoption. But I have a question that, like, do the individual have a choice to adopt or not to adopt digital apps? Like, how much that question of choice is relevant when it comes to the adoption? Secondly, when it comes to, like, when we see the debates on financialization and all sort of thing, when we see that there are financial intermediaries and even non-financial intermediaries that comes into picture, and they facilitate the digital payments app and even other financial services. So how are there any differences in the facilitation when it comes to financial intermediaries facilitating financial apps, or and when it comes to non-financial intermediaries? So how do you see these things?
So you raise two interesting points. The one about the non-financial intermediaries is, of course, super important, because I think this is where things move on even further in the near future. And these are from my point of view, these non-banking platforms. And I would say that even with the changes of the entire cookie world that is changing, how things are being trackable and are not trackable, I think here the power of the giant tech firms are just being strengthened. And anything that they do in terms of financialization will also be just strengthened. So I think that's really where it's going. And I think banks are trying really hard not to lose out, but I think the power of the data and the power of these companies, and I'm not even talking about only about Google and Meta, it's also Amazon, like Pierre just mentioned, the Amazon Go world, that has so much data about us and our consumer preferences that I think is really gigantic. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know enough about the regulatory aspects of these non-financial intermediaries. But I think that's really some place where we need to take a look at in the next, now already. And so the question of choice is interesting, because what we see is that there's a couple of these giant tech companies who offer these wallets, and then you need to have a regional card to be linked to your wallet, or you have regional apps. And for example, in the case of in our two little cases, Switzerland and Sweden, they're regional apps, and it's typically the regional apps that you can use, and you do have a choice between your card and your digital app. And in Sweden, we also see that there's some sort of backlash against the quest to use this type of app in all places. So we see that there's pensioners who refuse, who say we don't want to pay everything with our digital payment apps. We want to use cash. We want to receive cash. And so we also see, and that's also an interesting kind of social movement that is on the rise. Now, I would love to learn more about the Indian case, and perhaps we have a chance to talk more later on about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sophie, if I can just raise another question.
Yeah, sure.
Just coming off of that, I was also thinking, because you referenced Shoshana Zuboff's work, and a part of her analysis also looked at the disciplining of people. So we are not just the generators of data, but eventually that data is going to be used to discipline, control our behavior. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are as far as that applies to particularly the world of money and finance.
That's also an interesting question, and we're somewhat looking at it in our project from an empirical perspective, because there's really different elements to these digital payments app. On the one hand, they offer a seamless and quick payment, but they also produce records for us. So we can check on ourselves what we spend. So that's already one way to be disciplined, but also in the larger sense of data being accumulated and further analyzed and reassembled to discipline us on what we pay for next time, what we consume next time. Now, one of the question, of course, in our and this differs directly to using cash, right? When you, I don't know, have 200 whatever currency units, how you spend that, you would need to keep track yourself to see how, where it goes, or otherwise it's just gone at some point and you don't really remember how you spend it. And I think the disciplining is a super important part of these digital payments for these companies who and that's part of the reciprocity element again, that we get formatted as consumers.
In fact, one of my students who's here with us today, Abhinava, found something similar as far as record keeping is concerned in his field site in Kolkata. It's an eastern in India, and he was following up businesses and he saw how people are using payment apps. That was essentially a sort of secondary ledger.
Yes.
So keep a track of all the transactions that are taking place, and it's a convenient way for them to do it.
Yeah. And we're also looking at it. So one of the projects in Sweden will look at, because it's so pervasive there, also look at in households, how, how also in couples and in families, how money is spent and how these payments apps are used to as ledgers.
So I think we'll have a lot to discuss on that front in the panel that we are going to be coming up with soon. So very quickly, making this a democratic process, we are supposed to meet back at 11:30. Is everyone okay with meeting back at 11:30, or would you like a little bit of a longer break?
Perfect.
Okay. I'm going to take the silence to indicate it means